How are we doing today? Enjoying the conference so far, I hope, day one? All right, my name is Mahmoud. Let's see, I'm a Python Software Foundation Fellow, formerly at Stripe and PayPal. But today I'm going to talk to you about a story from ashes to glory, Python in the browser. Let's jump right in. So, I hope you all brought your laptops. I see a couple of you have them out. This is going to be a deep dive in hand building a browser Python app byte by byte. We only have 25 minutes, so we really got to get through this quick. Just joking, of course. In fact, because it's 2026, I've just, opened up a thing here, and I want to /plan. I'd like to have a Python in the browser setup that lets me test regexes using Python's RE module, specifically Python's RE module. And I want these colors, and of course, because it's a dev app, it must have dark mode, right? Okay, so diddly-dee. One prompt, one plan, $16 in tokens later, we have this running inside of this presentation. And, hello, Pyconians. Is that a term? Pycon. It's just like Python RE in my browser, right? Easy peasy. Does the dark mode work? Would you look at that? Dark mode works. Okay, so, sorry to get you all, what just happened here, right? What did this agent just do for us? It actually got, a web worker with Pyodide, which we'll talk a little bit about, and it bridges over to that with promises, and, frankly, it seems to work pretty well, so I say we ship it, right? Easy. But, that would mean the talk would be over, right? And that's me being replaced by AI, Isn't it such a bummer? But, of course, the agents don't get everything, and they miss some of the most important parts, and that delta is what we're going to be focusing on today. Quick show of hands, though, right? We got any Max planners here? Anyone, familiar with agents? Did you know that agents could do that? It's only been this way for 6 months or so, so I wouldn't blame you if the answer is no. I had a very different version of this talk back in 2023. You can look that up if you want. Okay, so what doesn't the agent cover? Most importantly, the why. Then we're going to go into the history. That's the graveyard. We're going to talk about the gaps that the agent missed. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the future and then some reflections. So, why Python in the browser? Obviously, if you're talking to 2011 me, 2010 me, the answer is because Python is awesome. And of course, JavaScript is terrible, right? Show of hands, anyone agree with this slide? Oh, wow, okay, everyone agrees with this slide. It's truth. And, but of course, these aren't good reasons, right? 2026 me knows that syntax isn't a good reason, and neither is dogma or aesthetics. Yeah, JavaScript is like a C-shaped Lisp, and Python is just better, but that's not why we choose technologies. Some real reasons that you should choose Python for the browser is budget. Brass tacks. It's free compute. It's free real estate. It's free compute on your clients' laptops and phones. And there's sandboxing that goes along with that. So if you want to give your users the ability to do some really wild stuff, they could decide to root your server, or you could just have them do it in their browser, and then you have a nice browser sandbox, and your hardware stays safe. Reproducibility is another great answer. We take it for granted, but basically, it working on my server is different than it working on your clients, and we would like to have the exact same semantics, so the best way to do that is to just use Python in both places. And finally, Python is awesome, is still a good reason to do Python in the browser, and but it's not the syntax as much as we like it and loved it back in the day. It's really about the ecosystem. Anyone want to hazard a guess how many packages are on PyPI these days? We're getting close to 1 million. I would wonder. It's 800,000, and I wonder when we're going to cross that 1 million points. But some of them are very awesome, and we wouldn't want to slot port them just to get them into our web app. All right, let's look at all the attempts to get those great reasons with Python in the browser throughout history. So when I started tracking Python in the browser, there was this cool thing called PyJamas. Anyone heard of PyJamas? Wow, getting some PyJamas fans in here. This, for me as a budding developer in the rise of Web 2.0, never felt like the right solution because we were transpiling Qt and GTK desktop widgets into the browser at the time when like everything was bootstrap and shiny and rounded corners, and it just felt a little off. And that basically turned into PyJS, which went away in 2015. Then there was Silverlight. Ooh, you could name a product back then, Silverlight, which allowed you to run Iron Python as a plugin in browsers. And basically that went the way of Dodo because all plugins are dead now, right? Remember Adobe Flash? People love the Flash. All right. PyJS, much love to the PyPy team. They made an attempt at it, right? And now they point at a technology called Pyodide. We'll get into that. And finally, there's this thing called RapidScript. It's like a Python-like language. It's not really Python, but it does derive a lot from Python syntax, and that also kicked the can. So speaking of kicking, a few of them are still around. One is Sculpt. Another is Brython. Both of these have their niches in education. Brython is actually all the way up to date and has Python 3.14. And there's also Transcript, which may be related to RapidScript, but that, they're stuck on 3.9. So these are pretty niche. All of these solutions I've covered lacked one of the following. Either Python syntax, right, like they sometimes changed it to be more JavaScript-like, the standard library, the Python ecosystem, like pip install, DOM access, or bidirectional JavaScript interoperations. So we are making web apps largely, right? And pretending like we don't have to interact with the DOM or native technologies like JavaScript is really not the way to win. Then we got to WebAssembly and Pyodide. And really there's sort of a prelude to this that ties into a big name today. Replit started as an emscriptonized C Python. And it gave you a Python REPL in the browser, repl.it. It's now a very big vibe coding platform. But it used to have a history in education, and before that it was just a cool experiment with a thing called Emscripten. Then Emscripten basically, which was a tool to do WebAssembly, right, like gets overshadowed by the standard itself. WebAssembly ships to all 4 browsers, and that's when things got serious. And in 2019, Mozilla, in an attempt to sort of bring science to a broader audience, they made a version of CPython that compiled to WebAssembly that actually had the standard library and so forth, called it Pyodide to go with their iodide scientific project. And in 2020, we got micropip with Pyodide 0.15. And now we're all the way to the point where we're even looking at putting WebAssembly packages into the Python package index. So you can have WebAssembly wheels like hosted there. So really it has come into its own, as I will soon show you. So a few examples of applications and notable projects on top of Pyodide. Jupyterlight, probably the fastest way for you to use Python in your browser now is to just open up a familiar Jupyter interface that runs in your browser called Jupyterlight. Marimo is another notebook that also supports WebAssembly. Gradiolite and Streamlit, or Stilite, bring ML demos and Streamlit to the browser. And then there's also PyScript, which is this platform, kind of more educational focused, lets you write Python in the browser as well. Now, all of these are about providing Python. Like Python is the feature, right? Python is the reason for these things to exist. I'm here to push this one step further. But first, let's take another look at what the agent doesn't know. So, back in 2023, I gave a version of this talk at Sentry about GlomPad, which is basically like that regex application that we built. It's the closest thing to it, and we're going to contrast those two things in this section. It's a data exploration tool on top of a library called Glom. And then in production, for the last few months, I've been running FinFam, which is basically like GitHub for consumer finance. It's like an app store for financial advice. And the key thing I want to highlight with FinFam is that none of the users know that it's Python. It just is a financial planning application that happens to, I know, use Python under the hood. So here's a reminder of what the agent built. We had the web worker with Pyodide and a regular expression engine, and it was bridged using a basic promise post message. Here's what it lacked. One, the agent didn't write any tests Isn't that kind of crazy? I mean, you think they were trying to sell me more than $16 worth of tokens, just put some tests in there, right? Pretty uncontroversial. It didn't use a UI framework. Everything was vanilla DOM. And then we also had typed boundaries, like is something that it didn't use. It just used promises. And finally, telemetry and worker state management. So let's go through them one by one. First of all, I don't think I need to see much about tests here. Playwright is what you do in 2026. It supports all the major browsers, and you can run it in your CI. I recommend adding pre-commit, which sort of can do some sanity checks before you push and waste CI minutes. So on to gap 2, which is UI framework. And I think that here is where I want to highlight that past attempts at trying to replace JavaScript with Python were pretty misguided. They basically had their own DOM models and so forth, and you had to wait for Python to be loaded until that application felt responsive. There are, best-in-class tools like Svelte and maybe React. Stripe kind of burned me out on React. But, these tools have compilers, they're fast, they have server-side rendering. That's the best-in-class tool that you use for your UI, and Python is the business logic engine. And so that also gives you plugins, like for TypeScript and ESLint, and that hooks into pre-commit. So you get basically additional verifiability, which really makes developing with agents a lot more effective as well. 3, Comlink. Anyone heard of Comlink? Okay, this is good. So Comlink basically gives you a typed boundary. It just looks like a function call that you can await to talk to your web workers. Web workers are effectively like sub-processes or background threads so that you can run heavy business logic without blocking the single-threaded UI. So you run all the JavaScript, and then you sort of send over any business requests to this web worker background process, and it sends results back. Do you like the code on the left that the agent wrote, or do you prefer to use an abstraction that only costs 4 kilobytes when the web page probably costs 10 megabytes or more? Any preferences? Okay, yeah, okay. Gap 4, telemetry. This is a pretty small one, and I don't really blame the agent for missing this, but when you are adding a new environment, and the browser is exactly that, that environment has logs, and they just go to the console of the user, right? If you want to get those logs back out, and you want to not fly blind and have errors report and so forth, you're going to need to use a service like PostHog or Sentry or something like that. Problem is, if you send it directly to them, ad blocker could easily drop that. The best thing to do is to set up a tunnel so that that telemetry comes to your server. You can either log it locally, or you can forward it on to your provider of choice. Critically here, like what you want to do is close that loop. So you're recording errors, and you're improving the user experience for your users. I think that should be clear. And finally, speaking of abstractions, worker state management. Earlier, the agent gave us just an is ready and is loading. What happens if both of those are true, right? Like this gives us 50% invalid states possible with this. And so really, for production, you want to have a state machine, and you want to ideally expose that state to the user. So they know when the site's loading, they know when the site is processing, so on and so forth. You should use a shared array buffer to get a fast, like Control-C-like interruption of something that goes out of control. That requires special HTTP headers that the agent, I guess, didn't know about, even though they're standard. So here's the final architecture. We still have the web worker, we still have the main thread, but we have a lot more verifiability. We have compilers in the form of Svelte, we have type checkers, we have the typed interconnect with Comlink, and we have the ability to interrupt it with a shared array buffer. We also have our telemetry, our tests, and altogether a much more production-ready system than the agent will give you. All right, now let's spend a moment to look into the looking glass of the future and talk about what's coming. So I think what a lot of the team are most excited about, the Pyodide team, is this CPython Tier 3 WASM support with PEP 816. That gives official support to WebAssembly as a build target, and I think is important for getting wheels into PyPI and so forth. Right now, Pyodide has this funny little JSON as an index that it downloads, and so this helps to work around it. I will say that in production, you may not be wanting to install directly from PyPI. It's fine for open source tools and so forth, but bundling a tar, you're bundling a venv up into a tar works, so you could use that. Speaking of packaging, Recreating Conda is what Script-Inforge is up to. And finally, Cloudflare is using Pyodide for something pretty interesting because web UX doesn't stop at the browser. So edge computing is something you can use in cases where you are network bound to give a faster user experience. And you don't necessarily need to push Pyodide all the way down to the user. So for my case with FinFam, I had something working on the server, but I wanted it to be more responsive for the user, so I just shipped business logic down to the browser. And I could have done instead, like basically do edge computing, which with Cloudflare workers, you have 1 second cold starts, and you can go ahead and basically not have to push it all the way down to the browser, but do something in between. That's where edge computing is sort of useful. All right, so let's take a moment for some reflections on this new age that we are developing in. The common thread that connects all of the gaps that we identified earlier was all about verifiability. So you want tests, you want types, you want compilers, and you want linters. Closing those loops is really the key to developing production applications in the age of agents. That lets you focus on the hard part, the creative part of software development. When you're building in this, as I was writing this talk, like it occurred to me that, like, in some sense, Python has won, right? I don't know how many people have been coming for PyCon for a very long time, but it used to be we were relatively new kid on the block. Now we've become the default, right? What was hot before has now become homework at most universities. And you know, that has interesting implications for us as Python developers. We are the language of good enough, right? Like, we can talk now a little bit about why wouldn't we want to put Python in the browser. You could say it's too big or it's too slow. These are arguments that go way back in the Python world, and it's ones that we're very used to dealing with because we are the language of good enough. And good enough is glorious. And so I'm really here to encourage you, like, start building with Python in the browser. It is very reliable. What you will build is going to be smaller than Figma's WebAssembly, like a single page application. You can focus on your user requirements, reach that correct state, have tests, and then you can worry about optimizing it later. If you want to slop port it to TypeScript, like, that's your business at that point. With every passing release, Python is becoming less and less of a bottleneck. That includes on the server, where they're working on tools like free threading, and on the browser as well. And it's a very interesting time because the line between prototype and product has become very blurred, right? And Python is a tremendous prototyping application. It's like an amazing time to build as a result. So if you have a favorite function inside of SciPy, if you have a favorite Python library on PyPI, you can build a first-class, polished application around that using best-in-class tools like Svelte for your UI, and then just wrap that core business logic with Pyodide. And you, no kidding, within an hour, right, just point it at the open source Glompad repo and say, I want this architecture. You can wrap any Python library you want and decide whether or not you want to sell it as a Python application. It could just be an application that happens to use Python. And so, yeah, I guess another reflection I had is that Python may actually be the language that agents are best at writing. If you've seen your agent work, then you've probably seen the tool calls flash by. There's millions of lines of Python being written that just happens to evaporate as soon as your agent's done with it. So what does that mean for us? I am advocating that a agent-assisted human beats a pure agent, and the agent-assisted human is the new unit of production. We're not going to go back from that. And the ecosystem and the community are the real advantages that have staying power. And so if you believe that one good turn deserves another, I'm building a knowledge commons for humans and agents. It's called goodturn.ai. You know, check it out, give me a shout. Here are links and resources to the projects that you've seen today. And if you did want that byte-by-byte system build of a Python browser app, I highly recommend David Beasley's 2019 talk. You can find it by scanning the QR code here, along with all the other links in this presentation. All right, thank you.
We
All right.
have a 10 minutes full for questions, so please line up in front of the microphone if you have any questions and are inspired to build apps.
I can run regexes for you as well.
Thank you so much for that talk. I was curious because I'm very unfamiliar with this territory, and I was curious about some of the past historical challenges that things like Pyodide have had to fight, and then I'm curious, what are the next challenges that something like this would have?
So Pyodide has been around since I think we said 17, 19, and I think that most of the challenge around it has been I guess size of the binary, right? Like when you actually download this thing, you visit FinFam, the page pops right up, but the business logic engine of it takes, say, 6-7 seconds. But if somebody's going to be on the page for minutes, in an ideal case, right, those seconds, they don't really add up. And so I think that infrastructure is really one of the main things that's caught up. 5G and faster internet and so forth has solved a lot of that. Pyodide has made efforts toward performance. If I'm being very frank, in my experience with it for the last few years, I haven't seen 3x speedups or anything like that. But there's incremental speedups, both with Python itself and with the Pyodide runtime. So browsers are speeding up WebAssembly, and so I think that probably these things are going to continue to get faster, and that biggest question that people usually level around these things is going to become more and more commodified and go away. Yeah, I think another thing is that a lot of projects have been focused on trying to replace JavaScript instead of play well with it. And now with web workers and service workers and basically creating progressive web applications, these web technologies have advanced far enough that you can have well-architected browser applications in Python. Yeah, I guess that's sort of what I imagine for the future of this stuff. There is sort of the question of the future of the web, right? There's bigger issues. If you're making consumer applications, maybe you should just have it generate a Swift app instead of having a web application that works well in multiple places. Capacitor is what one audience member has said. Thank you, Moshe.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah.
As someone who's not a plant and doesn't know you from anywhere, I just want to say you're very handsome, and this was a brilliant talk.
Much the same to you, fine stranger.
My question actually was, speaking of this question of the Swift app and things like that, how well supported are these things on mobile browsers? Is it universal, or can you make these things responsive?
So right now, you could open up any of the applications I've linked, and you can test it for yourself. But nominally, these are supported across browsers. Sometimes things act a little different, though. This is just cross-browser differences around header handling and so forth. You do have to do some testing. That's where Playwright comes in. But yeah, WebAssembly is pretty firmly supported, and Pyodide team is only gaining speed, as far as I can see.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for the talk. So I'm thinking of an application where, let's say, your business logic might be something you normally have on the server side, and let's say you want to have this portable version of it that could also run in the client. So I'm just trying to think of how that would look. It would just be that Python logic needs to be kind of pulled out of the server side application, just be portable, and then you get and plug it into Pyodide.
Yeah, so the way, for my business, FinFam, the way it works is that we have just a normal pyproject.toml. It gets packaged up along with the other dependencies into a tarball, and then that gets expanded on the client, and it pip installs locally from the browser's memory, so I don't hit PyPI. But yeah, you just extract it into a Python module or library. There are probably other things you could do about streaming down the actual text of the Python, but it'd be kind of funny to do.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so in short, you're not locked into client side only with this. Yeah.
No, not at all. I mean, the whole thing is that I got it working on the server first, and then as an optimization, I could use Pyodide to run it locally. I think that one business concern brought up here would be that, like, maybe someone might dump your source code, and you might, like, leak some secrets that way. That, I think, is where edge computing could be really useful.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, I really like the way that you kind of sort of like mentioned that like AI agents are best when given guardrails, like, compilers, tests, tooling, all that stuff, and that's kind of where they become most effective. So I was curious, is there any other tooling that you would recommend besides, like, for instance, you mentioned Svelte for like UI, right? Like, and so I'm curious, is there any other tooling you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I could like pull up my source now and look at the various things I use. But I mean, I use Rough and for the Python side, and yeah, I mean, I remember, like, there's a whole story about, like, sort of, I added that, so I had to have exclusions for certain rules until I actually got the code base all cleaned up. Yeah, that's the main one I guess I didn't talk about on the Python side.
Yeah, I guess, but do you also see like people kind of in the ecosystem starting to specifically design tools like for AI agents, like around that kind of like guardrail-esque thing?
I don't know, I mean, like, a lot of my workflow is just like I want everything to be legible to the agent as it would be to another person, like I was gonna hire a contractor. So like you could have an agents.md, but I don't know what you would put in an agents.md that you wouldn't just put in a readme.md, And so, yeah, not a lot of my tooling is too agent specific, other than maybe the good turn thing I was talking about.
Gotcha. Okay, cool, thank you.
Yeah. Go for it.
What was my question, though? Oh, okay. Are there any, like, tripwires as far as, like, compatibility goes with, like, an app you might normally write in Python, but, like, oh, Pyodide doesn't support this, like, thing?
Yeah, for sure. So Pyodide like has its own index right now, and it does trail like PyPI. It's basically a distribution, so you have to look at what's in that JSON and make sure those versions are the ones you pin on the server side, so you get exactly the same semantics. You really don't need to be like too specific. There was a while where like I couldn't run, for whatever reason, like Pydantic v2, and I had v2 on the server and v1 on the client, and like you just have to do normal engineering to sort of make those things work. Yeah, but that's a great point. Pyodide does have a more limited set of packages.
Cool, thank you.
Okay.
This is kind of a specific technical question following up on the back of that, but does micropip support installing from pylog.toml or any lock file? Because that would seem useful in this case.
I've not.
I
don't.
Pip just added the ability to install from a pylog.toml file like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I really don't think that it would. Yeah, I mean, right now I'm only installing from from the packages in micropip's repo in Pyodide's distribution effectively, and not directly from PyPI. So I'd be really surprised. It's not going to support Git sources, for instance.
Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting, though. Thank you.
Sure. Alrighty. I think that's our time. But yeah, if you'd like to catch up about Python in the browser or anything agent related, I'll be around until like 5 or so. All right. Have a good one.